Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video. Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video.
Thanks for watching. Follow a brighter destiny for more powerful stories, and don't forget to subscribe.
Well, story, sir. You need to leave that seat. Now. Well, words cut through the cabin like a blade dropped on marble. Every head in first class turned at once, but nobody spoke. Not when the flight attendant stood over the man in seat 2C, her voice sharp, her spine straight as a ruler. It was not the couple behind her watched with thin, satisfied smiles, as if the ending had already been written before the story even started. Elias Cole didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply sat there with his hands resting flat on the armrests, his eyes calm, like a man who had lived this exact moment before had decided, this time, not to run from it. It was my assigned seat, he said quietly. A few passengers shifted, uncomfortable. Someone lowered their gaze to their coffee. Someone else lifted a phone an inch off their lap. But still, nobody stepped in, because it is always easier to stay on. Easier to believe the uniform over the man in the hoodie. It was the tension pulled tighter across the cabin. One small detail went unnoticed. A worn silver watch on Elias Cole's wrist catching the morning light through the oval window, its edge engraved. With a mark no one bothered to look at closely. Not yet. But in less than 31 minutes, that time cabin, those same faces, would understand exactly who they had tried to remove. It was by then, it would not just be one seat on the line. It would be everything. The cabin lights held a clean, sterile that morning, reflecting off brushed steel and cream leather, the kind of quiet that only exists in first class, a curated silence, where even the engines seemed to hum for someone else. Flight 214 said parked at Gate C11 in Chicago, the sky outside a flat, bruised gray, promised delay before it delivered one. Elias Cole sat by the window in seat 2C, a navy hoodie dipped halfway, jeans worn soft at the knee, boots that had clearly walked more miles than they'd flown. Everything around him was polished and predictable. Yeah, until it wasn't. It was, sir, I'm going to need you to step out of this seat. His voice came from the aisle, clean, practiced, the kind of voice trained to sound kind while giving an order. Elias didn't move. The woman standing over him wore a navy uniform pressed to the seam, her scarf tied with exact precision, a brass name tag catching the overhead light. Diane Whitmore. I'm sorry, Elias said, looking up at her, his tone even not confused, not defensive, just steady. "Was seat," Diane said, a little louder now, just enough for the row behind to hear, "is reserved for our priority members." A ripple moved through the cabin. Not sound, exactly. More a tightening in the air. Elias glanced down at the boarding pass, resting his knee, lifted it between two fingers, and held it out. "Seat 2C," he said. "That's what it says." Diane didn't take it right away. Behind her, a man cleared his throat, late 50s, silver hair combed with intention, a gold watch catching the light as he adjusted his cuff, as if time itself answered to him. "Was always sit here," the man said, not bothering to lower his voice. It was flight, same seats. His wife stood just behind him, one hand gripped tight around the strap of a pale leather handbag, her smile thin at the edges, as though she had already decided how this would end. Diane finally took the boarding pass, glanced at it, then back at Elias. "Yes," she said slowly, "I see that, but there must have been a booking error." "It was booking error," Elias repeated. It wasn't sarcasm. It was a fact, set down carefully between them like a stone on a scale. The silver-haired man exhaled sharply. "Look," he said, stepping into the aisle, crowding the space between them. "We don't have all morning for this. It was move him so we can get settled. Move him. Not ask, not check. Just move." A few rows back, a passenger lowered his reading glasses to watch over the frame. A young woman in row 4 slowly lifted her phone. Not obviously, not yet, but enough. Elias felt all of it, the eyes, the weight, the quiet expectation that he would simply fold. He had felt it before, in hotel lobbies, where the concierge spoke to the man behind him first. In meetings, we, his idea.your panos wincing at my snazed, or in suddenly mattered. Placed the boarding pass gently on the armrest. I'm in the correct seat, he said again. Was Diane's smile tightened by a fraction? Sir, I understand this might be confusing. It was not confusing. He didn't interrupt her aggressively. He simply finished the thought for her, and that made it land harder than any shout could have. The silver-haired man laughed under his breath. You hear that? Not confusing. His wife let out a soft, amused breath, eyes still fixed on Elias, like he was a stain that needed lifting, not a person who needed understanding. Was Diana straightened? Mister, she glanced at the pass, Cole. Was need to cooperate. We have loyal members who rely on consistent seating. Consistency, Elias said quietly, is not the same thing as ownership. Words settled into the cabin like dust after something breaks. A man across the aisle stopped scrolling his phone. The young woman he lifted open her camera an inch higher. Was Diane felt the shift, not lost yet, not in control either, just different. Was sir, she said, her voice cooler now. Refusing a crew instruction can become a serious issue. Here it was, the line, not about a seat anymore. About authority. I'm not refusing anything, Elias said. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for. The silver-haired man stepped closer, his voice dropping lower, rougher. You're holding up the whole cabin over one seat. Is that really worth it, to you? Elias turned his head slightly toward him. For you, he said, it's one seat. It was not supposed to be real. A pause stretched long enough to make people uncomfortable, because they didn't yet know what it meant. Diane inhaled slowly through her nose, recalibrating. Let me be clear, she said. I need you to gather your things and move. Elias didn't reach for his bag. Didn't blink right away. The silence stretched till it became until a woman row 2 adjusted her scarf, eyes flicking between the two of them, until a man behind her coughed softly, as if trying to break the tension without actually getting involved. Elias leaned forward, picked up his boarding pass again, looked at it, then set it back down, carefully, deliberately. It was not moving, he said. No anger in it, no defiance. Just certainty. And somehow that certainty made the air in the cabin feel heavier than any shouting match ever could have. It was Diane's supervisor arrived, 4 minutes later. Grant Sullivan wore a dark vest over a pressed white shirt, his posture rigid before he'd even reached row 2. It took in the whole scene in one breath. The silver-haired man crowding the aisle, Diane's tight shoulders, the banjo tinted in not touch, the woman did in not watch, the macho in row 4 holding her phone, just low enough to claim she wasn't recording. High enough that everyone knew she was. Was sir, Grant said. I'm Grant Sullivan, cabin supervisor. I understand there's an issue with your seat. Was no issue with my ticket, Elias replied. That's not what I asked, Grant said, the tone narrowing like a door closing halfway. My crew has requested you relocate so we can accommodate a seating concern, Grant continued. We need your cooperation to get this flight moving. A seating concern, Elias repeated. It sounded harmless, like paperwork. He glanced at the empty seat beside him. Then at the silver-haired man still standing in the aisle. Have assigned seats, he said. This is about flexibility, Grant said. Sometimes we adjust for the overall experience of our passengers. Which passengers? Elias asked. The question hung there, precise, not rhetorical. All passengers, sir, Grant said, a half-second too late. Then the adjustment, Elias said, would be for them to sit in their assigned seats. The silver-haired man's patience cracked completely. Are you serious right now? We've flown this airline for 19 years. 19 years, and you're going to let this guy over a seat? Not arguing, Elias said, meeting his eyes. I'm staying where my ticket says I belong. Word landed differently on every person in that cabin. Long. The woman in row 2 lowered her gaze, fingers tightening around her scarf. The young woman with the phone steadied her grip. Diane shifted her weight, discomfort finally breaking through her composure. Grant exhaled slowly. Sir, If a crew member gives an instruction and you refuse it, that can escalate into a compliance issue. My behavior hasn't changed, Elias said. This isn't about behavior, Grant replied. It is, Elias said quietly. You're just calling it something else. You're going to move me, Elias said after a pause. I need it documented. Your name, your employee number, the reason for moving me, and conversation that it isn't a safety matter. It was documented, Grant repeated. Yes, Elias said. That's not escalation. That's accountability. The words settled into the cabin, like a weight nobody had asked for. Grant glanced briefly toward the front of the plane, then back. There was no need to make this more complicated than it is, he said. It already is, Elias replied. From somewhere behind them, a voice quiet and hesitant. You hasn't done anything wrong. It came from the woman in row 2. It was Diane turned sharply. Ma'am, please let us handle this. I'm just saying, the woman murmured. Not looking up, he showed his ticket. Silence again, but cracked this time, not empty. I'm going to contact operations, Grant said finally. It was due, Elias said. Not a threat, an invitation. It was hours earlier, long before the lights of first class and the tightening silence around row 2. Elias Cole had stood in a place where nobody looked at him twice. It smelled like onions, warm bread, and old metal, the kind of smell that stays in your jacket long after you've left the building. It was not supposed to be real. It drifted through the narrow hallway of a small community kitchen on the east side of Cleveland, where chilped met dented steel counters and an overworked refrigerator never quite stopped humming. Elias rolled up his sleeves, forearms marked not by scars but by years of quiet, ordinary labor. Crouched beside an aging industrial stove, its pilot light flickering, struggling to survive one more shift. One's supposed to be, you sure you know what you're doing with that thing? A woman's voice called from the doorway. Mrs. Adeline Foster stood there wiping her hands on a faded dish towel. Late 70s, small frame but steady, gray hair tucked under a knit cap. It was run this kitchen for 22 years, feeding anyone who walked in without asking a single question first. Oh, I don't, Elias said, glancing back with a faint smile, but I know someone who did. Who adjusted a small valve near the base of the stove. It was metal groaned, then clicked softly. Nothing happened for a second. When the flame steadied, no burst of light, no applause, just a quiet, reliable burn. Well, I'll be, Mrs. Foster said, stepping closer. Maintenance told me that thing was done for. Was sometimes things just need a second look, Elias said. You always talk like that? He asked. Only when I'm trying not to talk too much, he said. And a faint laugh escaped her, low and genuine. It was the far side of the room. A boy no older than 9 sat swinging his legs at a small table. Mr. Elias fixed it again, the boy said, grinning. Not fixed, Elias corrected gently. Was helped it keep going. The boy nodded, like that made perfect sense. Usually did when Elias said it that way. It was Knots, paused near the front counter. You didn't have to come in today. You said you had somewhere to be. Elias checked his watch, an old silver timepiece with a worn leather strap, its face scratched but clean. Well, I do, he said. And you still showed up, she said. You had time, he replied simply.
A few minutes.
As the lunch line began forming out, Elias slipped into the small Hamed Bilagodakos, Ropus barely a cleg on a closet, filing cabinet stacked against Tanigat's desk that had seen better decades. Pulled a folded envelope from his pocket, and ten sound. No name on it, no note, just an amount written on the inside that would cover the kitchen's rent for the next 4 months. Slid it beneath a stack of paperwork, and left without a word. Beside the air was colder, sharper winter, refusing to fully let go. His phone buzzed once. He glanced at the screen. No emojis, no small talk, just 6 words. Board is waiting. Need you. He read it once, then again. His expression didn't change. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and kept walking. 2 steps later, he stopped beside one woman, struggling with a grocery bag that had split it, the seam, scattering across the sidewalk. Crouched without hesitation, gathering them one by one. Thank you, the woman said, embarrassed. It happens, he replied, handing her the last one. You headed somewhere important? She asked, noticing the quiet purpose in the way he carried himself. It was work, he said, and didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Behind him, the small kitchen continued its work, feeding people, warming hands, holding space for those who needed it. And ahead of him, beyond the airport, something larger was already in motion, something that had nothing to do with which seat he sat in, and everything to do with who he actually was. Back in the cabin, the silence had deepened, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, the kind of silence that exists right before something breaks open. It was Diane stood alone in the aisle, her hands still wrapped around her tablet, her confidence slipping piece by piece. "What did you do?" she asked quietly, stripped of her earlier authority. "It was made a call," Elias said. "That's all? That's enough." Grant returned from the galley faster than before, his steps no longer measured, his jaw tight, in a way that came from pressure, not control. "Mr. Cole," he said, "did you just make a call?" "Yes," Elias said. "To whom?" "Someone who listens," Elias replied. The answer didn't clarify anything. It confirmed everything. The gate agent stepped into the cab, her headset pressed to her ear, her posture stiff with an urgency that hadn't been there minutes ago. "Grant," she said, "they're holding other flights." Grant turned sharply. "What?" "Flights 814 and 902, she said, delayed. System override." "It was not possible," Diane peppered. "Gate operations don't just—" She stopped, because suddenly it did make sense, or at least it started to. Grant looked back at Elias, really looked this time. Not at the hoodie. Not at the seat. At the man. The stillness. The certainty. It was complete absence of fear. "Can I ask you something?" Grant said, his voice lower now, almost private. "Was that watch? Where did you get it?" "It was a gift," Elias said. "From who?" "Someone who believed in what I was building," he replied. "What are you building?" Diane asked, before she could stop herself. Elias reached into his pocket, checked his phone. More messages now, short lines, urgent tone. Didn't show them. He didn't need to. "You're about to find out," he said. Was gate agent's voice crackled again. "They're asking for confirmation," she said. "Was name, seat, everything." "Confirmation of what?" the silver-haired man demanded. Was not supposed to be real, because the question had already begun to answer itself. "Trevor." "Grant, this is Supervisor Sullivan," he said into the phone a moment later. "To confirm the name of the passenger in seat 2C. We'll pause." He spelled it out letter by letter, voices, keyboards, movement on the other end, a system waking up. "Was stay where you are," the voice said finally. "Do not proceed with removal. We're verifying something." Grant walked back down the aisle slower this time, careful, as though every step required thought. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, "I need to understand what's happening." "We're already seeing it," Elias said. "No," Grant replied, I'm seeing effects." "Need the cause." Elias leaned back, calm, unmoved. "You'll get there," he said. "It was built part of it," he said finally. "The system your airline uses to sequence flights, coordinate gate timing, route passenger data across your hubs." Words weren't dramatic. They were technical. And that made them worse. Was Diane's face changed slowly. "What company?" she asked, though some part of her already knew she wouldn't like the answer. "Meridian Flow Systems," the gate agent said behind them, reading off her screen, her eyes widening. "Was not that's the platform we've been integrating, Yaller." Grant blinked. He knew that name. He'd seen it in briefings, in internal memos marked Park's priority that most people skimmed without absorbing. "You're saying," Grant began, then stopped, because he didn't know how to finish the sentence. "Well, I'm saying," Elias said, "that your airline relies on my company's system to coordinate departures across 9 different hubs." "It was the delays," Diane said slowly. "The other flights." "They're responding," Elias said. "What?" Grant asked. "To a flagged event," Elias replied. "It was anomaly in passenger handling. Something the system isn't designed to ignore." "We're the founder," Grant said. It wasn't a question anymore. "Wes," Elias said. The silver-haired man, Walter Hargrove, stared at him, something cracking behind his eyes. "Was not supposed to, that's..." He started. because everything he had said in the last minutes suddenly sounded different in his own ears. His wife, Eleanor, looked down at her hands, her grip on the handbag finally loosening. "We didn't know," Diane said, her voice almost unrecognizable now. "Was no," Elias said. "You didn't." Then after a oft pause, "But you didn't need to." Words landed harder than anything shouted could have. Because they stripped away the excuse entirely. It was never about who he was. It was about how they treated him before they knew. Was man in row 4 lowered his phone slightly and spoke quiet but steady. "Was got everything," he said. No one told him to stop. Recording wasn't a problem anymore. It was evidence. He showed his ticket, the woman in row 2 said, her voice trembling. Right at the beginning, there wasn't any confusion. "I saw it too," a man behind her added. His narrative was slipping, and no one in that cabin knew how to grab it back. Grant ran a hand over his face. "We need to correct this," he said. "Start," Elias said, "by telling the truth." "I'll write the report," Diane said. "Exactly as it happened. Make sure it's accurate," Elias said. Nodded. And for the first time, she meant it completely. "Mr. Cole," Grant said a few minutes later, his voice quieter, more careful. "Would you like to see happen?" Elias didn't rush the answer. "I want the record to reflect exactly what happened," he said. "It was not just the outcome, the process. And I want an independent review. Not handled internally, not summarized. Reviewed. That would go beyond our department," Grant said. "It should," Elias replied. "Corporate is asking if you'd speak with them directly," Grant said a moment later. "Wes," Elias said. "You will," Diane asked, surprised. "Why wouldn't I?" he replied. "It isn't about avoiding the system. It's about fixing it." Was call connected a minute later. A voice came through, older, controlled, but strained at the edges. "Mr. Cole, this is Harold Bennett, Executive Operations. We've reviewed the situation. Want to offer a formal apology and assure you corrective action is already underway." "Well, I'm listening," Elias said. "We're initiating an independent review, effective immediately. All personnel involved will be evaluated. We'll implement additional safeguards." "Would," Elias said, and the passengers who spoke up. "They will not face any repercussions," Bennett said quickly. "We've already issued that directive." "Thank you," Elias said. "Was Cole," Bennett added. "We value our relationship with Meridian Flow Systems. Hope this incident doesn't affect. This isn't about a contract." Elias cut, not sharply, but clearly. "It's about trust. And whether your system reflects the people who use it." With silence on the line. "I understand," Bennett said finally. "Then prove it," Elias said, and handed the phone back. Elias stepped back into the cabin. Grant looked at him for a long moment. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said. Simple, unpolished, not part of any script. "It was no," Elias said. "That was enough." The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are TWR. Now preparing for departure." A soft ripple moved through the cabin. Seat belts clicked. Overhead bins closed. The ordinary motions of the flight resumed, but nothing about the moment felt ordinary anymore. Was the plane pushed back from the gate, Elias looked out the window. The gray sky had broken slightly, a thin line of light stretching across the horizon. "Mr. Cole," the woman in row 2 said softly, leaning toward him. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." "You said it when it mattered," he replied. "It was not supposed to be real." Somewhere in Foster who would not find an envelope tucked beneath her paperwork. One name, no explanation, just enough to keep the kitchen open. Well, boy would come back next week. And Elias would be there, not because anyone asked him to, but because that was who he was. A man who stayed, who didn't need to prove anything the truth to eventually stand beside him. It was not supposed to be real. 6 weeks later, the airline's internal review would confirm everything the passengers on Flight 24 had already witnessed with their own eyes. Grant Sullivan kept his position, but completed a full retraining program later called the hardest 3 weeks of his career and asked to help redesign it for new hires. Diane Whitmore transferred to guest relations. where she became, of all things, the employee most often praised by name in customer letters. Walter and Ellen Hargrove never flew that airline again, not because they were banned,
but because, as Walter admitted to no one but himself on a quiet Tuesday morning,
he couldn't sit in seat 2. Exactly how small his own certainty had made him look. His seat hadn't changed, but the way people saw it had. Maybe that was where the real change always begins. Verbatim CTA and Dicklamer, this story is a work of fiction, whose resemblance to real airlines, companies, or persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. It was not supposed to be Eric Blur. Smimples to prove. Dignity is not something you earn by proving your net worth, and it should never have been conditional in the first place. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever watched someone get judged before anyone knew who they really were and stayed quiet? I want to hear it. And if you believe stories like Metro, subscribe, because the next one might hit even closer to home. YouTube descriptions: The mistake. A flight attendant and a wealthy couple decide a quiet man in a hoodie doesn't belong in seat 2C. So they try to force him out, certain nobody would push back. His consequence: 1. Phone call to grounds or flights, and the airline discovers the man they tried to build part of the military system keeping their planes in the sky. A story about assumptions, dignity, and what happens when the people you dismissed turn out to be the ones holding everything together. Watch until the end. The moment he says 4 words changes the entire flight. Life lessons: a short story, dignity, karma story, airline worthery, stand-up, respect, street thumbnail, prompt. A tense first-class airplane cabin, cinematic realism, warm morning light through oval windows. On the left, a well-dressed flight attendant and an older wealthy man in a suit, both frozen in shock and horror. Faces pale, eyes wide, one hand half raised in protest. On the right, a calm black man in his late 30s, wearing a simple navy hoodie, worn jeans, and a scratched wristwatch. Sitting faint, knowing hands resting easy on the armrests, radiating quiet composure against their panic. Dramatic contrast lighting, shallow depth of field, muted navy and cream color palette, ultra detailed, shot like a movie still, no text overlay.